Sometimes a book finds you when the odds are stacked against you, and being underestimated has become, well, part of the job. Then someone bold enough to ignore the limits decides to chase the truth anyway. And I've got an author I'd like you to meet who delivers a smart, funny, and fast-moving story set in 1962 Washington, where one determined young woman turns a simple phone message into a trail of secrets, newsroom battles, and Cold War intrigue. Stick around because you'll not only learn more about the book, you'll learn about the writing voyage this author took to create it.
Welcome to A Book Finds You podcast. This week's guest is Sarah Goodman Confino. Join us as she shares the inspiration behind her book, along with her writing process, routines, and challenges. And now, here's your host, bestselling author, Rob Jolles.
Today's guest, Sarah Goodman Confino, is the best-selling author of 6 novels, including Don't Forget to Write, Behind Every Good Man, and the upcoming Off the Record. Former teacher, she lives in Montgomery County, Maryland, with her husband, 2 sons, and 2 miniature schnauzers. When she's not writing, she can be found on the beach, the Peloton, or a Bruce Springsteen concert, sometimes even dancing on stage. We might have to hear about that. Happy to have you with us, and welcome to the show, Sarah.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Pleasure. All right, let's get the Springsteen piece. Did you actually physically go on the stage with Springsteen?
I did actually. So I've got my 48th show coming up next week. And the time I was on stage was in 2012. I wasn't going to go to this show. I had gone to, I think, 4 shows the previous month, and I was broke because I was still teaching. And a friend said, look, I've got an extra ticket. You drive us to Charlottesville. It's yours. And I made a sign asking to dance with Jake Clemens, who was new to the band at the time. And I figured there was no way. And they did a lottery for wristbands. And we wound up, I think we were the last people to get wristbands because we were running late. And we wound up 9 through 13 into the pit. So we were just front and center, elbows on the stage. And sure enough, during Dancing in the Dark, I got pulled up and it was amazing.
Wow. And is Jake Clemens Clarence's son?
His nephew.
His nephew. Okay, good. All right. Well, now you've just heard Springsteen talk by Rob and Sarah, and now on with the show. But I had to hear that. Congratulations. That is a life experience that many dream about. So good on you.
Thank you. So actually, I mentioned Bruce sort of in my 3rd novel, Don't Forget to Write. It's set in 1960, and there's a scene on the Atlantic City boardwalk, and you can't write a New Jersey book and not throw a Springsteen reference in there somewhere. So there's a little boy who runs into my main characters, and his mom yells, Bruce, wait for your sister. And he looks up with an underbite. And I actually mailed a copy to Bruce. You don't want to know how I got his address. Things happened. And I thought it would bounce back, but somebody signed for it. So there's a copy of one of my books in the Springsteen house. It is probably propping up a wobbly table leg somewhere, but it is there.
Well, it's your table leg, by golly, by gosh. Congratulations. All right, Off the Record. You've got humor, and you've got suspense, you've got historical tension. How do you balance that kind of the big 3 there?
This one was kind of fun to write for me because I was a journalism teacher for 21 years. I was a journalism major in college. And while writing on deadline has come very naturally to me from that experience, I haven't really gotten to play with a journalism story before. And I loved that in the Cold War era, there was really just so much going on that people didn't necessarily know about. And it was also really cool to explore a world where women really weren't in the news at that point. So there were women's sections at a lot of newspapers. So the Washington Post, for example, had the For and About Women section. But it was really like housework stuff, like how do you get stains out of the mattress and, how do you make your husband happy, not hard-hitting news. And Helen Thomas was new in the White House press corps, but there really wasn't a lot of other reporting that women were out there doing. So I wanted to be able to tell a story where a woman is told she can't cover something, and she really is able to find something that male reporters weren't necessarily going to or that they would have overlooked. The actual intrigue itself, I originally pitched a KGB themed thing, and I'm actually glad I settled on Cuba for this one because I knew nothing about that. And I actually took a class at the University of Maryland on America in the 1960s. And I had been thinking it would be all like hippies and Woodstock. It was really mostly Kennedy era politics and the assassination and Cuba's role in a lot of things. So I actually had a lot of background knowledge on this that I got to use. That was probably my favorite class in college, along with media law. So I pulled from all of that, and it was just really fun how it came together.
Wow. Now, are you a Terp alumni?
I am. In
Yeah,
fact, my graduation cap is behind me on my bookshelf.
there you go. Well, I snuck a peek at your LinkedIn file, so I had a head start on that one. I was pretty sure I had that right. All right, I'm a fellow Terp, by the way. That's why it caught my eye.
Love it.
Yep, yep, yep. Go Terps. Fear that turtle. Now, you you're writing about something that happened in 62. I'm looking at you on screen and I'm going to pay you a compliment. It doesn't sound like you were graduating from 1962. So, how do you get the details when you're writing, I know you're researching, but how do you get the details of an era that you really weren't a part of?
So, when I did my first one that was set in the early 60s, and I apologize to anyone who lived through that for calling that historical fiction because that is my publisher, not me. I knew I was actually writing on a deadline, and I kept asking my parents questions. And my dad finally said, "Look, I was 9 in 1960. I don't remember any of this. Call your aunt and uncle." My uncle is 94, and my aunt, if I tell you her age, she will hear this somehow, hunt me down, and kill me. So I can't tell you how old she is. But they remember literally everything, and they've been a lot of my firsthand research on this era. So I remember I called my uncle, or I texted my uncle at 10 o'clock at night one night, and I said, for a previous book, how did you get from Philadelphia to the shore before they had the Atlantic City Expressway? And I think he'll call me in the morning with an answer. No, he screenshotted Google Maps, traced out the Black Horse Pike, and told me how long it would take a normal person to drive it in 1960, or my father, who speeds. Like, he knew everything. It's just wild. So I can like text him and be like, "Hey, I need a restaurant that a reporter would eat at in this part of town." And he knows the answer. But what was really funny in this book, so I used a restaurant, Duke Zeebert's, which was kind of where everybody went to see and be seen in
I
DC. My
remember
uncle
Duke
gave me the
Zeberts.
restaurant.
Yep, yep.
And I remember I called my dad. He was in a meeting, so I wrote the scene. And then when he called me back, I was like, "Did you ever eat there? You know, I got some from Uncle Marvin, but do you have any memories of being there?" And this is a scene where a character gives my main character a little bit of grief about being Jewish and is like, "Oh, do you know him because you're both Jewish?" And she's like, "The community's not that small." And then it turns out, of course, he knows her father and uncle. And so I asked my dad, "Did you ever eat at Duke Zebert's?" And he goes, "No, but I went to middle school with his daughter." And I'm like, "Okay, then that's," but my dad's side is lifelong DC residents. So we've got a lot of family history here. And there, I've been able to work a lot of kind of family lore into it. So there's a little boy who throws a football next door in one scene in this. That's actually my dad. And so I put him right next to my grandmother's house. I've loved being able to use family for this research. I've gotten so many really cool tidbits. I'm also friends with Alex Saronis, who runs the MoCo show down here in Montgomery County. And I've texted him a bunch of times when I couldn't find an answer to something. So I'm kind of responsible for the rumor that Montgomery Donuts is coming back. It's not, but I had to figure out how to spell it. And so I texted him. He found the owner's grandson, and then he wrote a story because of my question. And then all of a sudden, everybody thought it was coming back. And I was like, "Sorry."
That's hysterical. I'm a lifelong resident, so I remember Zeberts, Duke Zeberts, and I remember Montgomery Donuts. We used to call it Modos because I
Yep.
believe they were open 24 hours a day, or they were open very late. I know that, but right near the McDonald's. All right.
Mhm.
Anyway, let's keep. This is a trip down memory lane for me too, by the way. Uh, Here, how do you know you know you're this isn't your first rodeo? You've written a bunch of books now. How do you know when an idea is worth pursuing, and not giving up on it? I know once we get momentum, we're rolling, but when you're first starting to kind of kick that idea around, how do you know it's worth going after?
So I usually come up with a character before I have the actual story, and the story kind of comes later and is built around the character. But I like to describe it like Zeus and Athena. I get this character in my head, and she starts banging on my head until she's just got to get out on paper. I don't always know exactly what she wants. I usually actually go for a couple of long walks when I'm kind of percolating an idea, and that's where my characters talk to me. So if you see me out walking along the ICC in Montgomery County and talking to myself, that's me plotting.
There you go. Well, ever since we've gotten cell phones we're listening on earbuds, it's weird because you know, 30 years ago, you see somebody walking down the sidewalk talking to themselves, and you're thinking, poor guy, poor woman. Now it's frequently somebody talking on the phone or reciting something, but it's a better time to be alive and doing that. Let's just put it that way.
It's true. I look a little bit less crazy.
Yeah. Do you when you've got that idea, do you see the end in mind and
So
work
I have
backwards?
to know the end. If I don't
Ah.
know the end, I am not going to be able to write this story. I need to know where they wind up. My outlines, however, because I sell on proposal now, so before I actually write the book, are messy. I turned in my first ever outline, and I was an English teacher, so I did it with the Roman numerals and the letters, and my agent looked at it and said, "I don't know what I'm looking at." And I was like, "Okay, let me try again." So I kind of word vomited about four single space pages of everything that I knew happened, which is apparently not how any other writer outlines either. They all like are organized and do it chapter by chapter. But my characters like to misbehave. So I always kind of have to leave room in what I call the squishy middle for them to get into trouble. And some of my best scenes weren't in the outline at all. So a lot of this kind of comes as I'm writing, and my characters are usually a lot of fun. So they get into some fun trouble.
I'm glad you said that. First of all, everybody has their own way. That's what I love about this show. There's no right or wrong way, but your way is somewhat similar to my way of writing, including the part where people get nervous, like, so you outline everything. Oh, and it's not a straitjacket. It's just a path that we're building. And the most beautiful parts of that path are the ones that we didn't expect, where it deviated. But I can't get there without a path. So now that's me. We'll get a guest on next week who will say, I can't stand doing it that way. But I connect with what you're doing, including it's an amateur. I've never published them, but when I'm working on a poem, I always have the end in mind and then kind of work to get there. But I don't want to be discover the end when I get there. I think that's the most beautiful part. So I want to know what that looks like.
So, in this book, it's got a twist at the end, and I definitely knew exactly what the twist was going to be from the very beginning. Um, and that was a little bit easier to kind of get to there. But no, I have to know that ending, or I'm not going to get anywhere. I'm kind of just going to meander with the story. So I've learned that about myself at this point.
Yeah. Do you have a daily writing routine once you're engaged, once you got you're on the project? Is it daily? Is it weekly? How do you parse it out?
So I'm a mom. I've got a just turned 6-year-old yesterday and a 9-year-old. So my schedule tends to revolve around them. As soon as a kid is sick, my writing goes out the window for the week, which is super fun. Um, and I have to get them to school in the morning, so I can't actually start work until after 9 o'clock. And at that point, I have to exhale from getting them to school. So, now that I'm not teaching, I'm better about being able to do it pretty much every day. My mom actually says that I tend to go dark from about 10 to 2 every day. Otherwise, I'm sending memes and doing all of that. But um, it's different every day. I like to describe myself as a chaos gremlin because just whatever works, that's when I'm squeezing writing in. So sometimes I've got my laptop with me at my kids' swim practice and doing whatever I can there. Sometimes I'm sitting in my 9-year-old's room as he's falling asleep at night with my laptop and trying to squeeze some in. It's definitely chaotic, but it's working right now. So
We all have our own system, and usually it's shaped the way you are. Some of us don't have the children at home, but we have other responsibilities. Is your writing limited to novels? In other words, are you a blogger? Do you maintain a website and kind of change that content around?
So I should be doing more of that. I had a pretty successful blog for a while in the early 2010s. That one actually blew up. I got death threats on something. People didn't understand that it was humor. I went to a concert. I like joked about how I was too prissy to be at this concert and the fans were not happy, and that blog is long gone. I started a second one that was kind of a mom blog before I got my publishing contract. But the reality is now I'm contracted for 2 books a year for next year. And so other writing, just the time isn't great on it. I should update my newsletter a lot more often than I do. I don't know why. I always feel like that's annoying people, even though they clearly signed up to get my work, like they want to get these emails. But I am limiting that to once a month just because I feel like it's going to bother people if I send more than that. But the blogging I have not touched in a long time, and I'm terrible about updating my website.
Well, you're at least you're honest. I appreciate that. All right, today's lesson for you is got to keep that website up to date. That is, back when your aunt and uncle who were helping you out were running around. It was called a yellow pages, white pages. But that's really how people find you. We want to keep that fresh. The good news is you've got a publisher behind you, a conventional publisher, so you're working it that way. I would also just a person who's just offering some advice is a guy who has actually stayed with a blog for 17 years. I haven't gotten in any trouble that I'm aware of. Uh, I I initially actually was going once a week. I'd stay at once a week, but I think the writing suffered. I had other things to do, and every word we put down matters. But I really developed a rhythm of every 2 weeks, and I've never had anybody say that I'm hitting them too often with a blog. I maybe it's the distribution where I don't when I send it out, I send out 3 sentences explaining what the blog's about in a link because I don't want people to read something that they don't find value in. I'll lose them as a reader. So if those 3 sentences don't get them, I don't want them to hit the link. But maybe revisit that once a month, uh, just from your friendly podcast host. I think your readers will appreciate it.
I will definitely work on that. I know I need to.
Yeah, just a revisit on that one. Do you have a well, it's interesting because a lot of the people that I interview on this show, it's their first book or they're not really as familiar with the conventional publishing side. So let's just spend a couple minutes there. Uh, First of all, how did you find your publisher?
So I actually, my debut novel was the fifth book that I wrote. I self-published 2 books in 2010 and 2011 under my maiden name before I was married, and then signed with my first agent in 2012. She shopped the book that we were shopping. It was a comedy about teaching, inspired by some real life events for several years. She had me rewrite that book probably 50 times. I hated that book by the time we were done with it. And finally, she got heavily into romance and she was like, you know what this book needs? It needs a steamy makeout scene. And I was like, it's about a teacher. Who do you want her making out with? Because I'm not writing that kind of book. And then she switched agencies. She recommended me to 5 other people, one of whom we totally clicked. She's my agent to this day. I love her. And she told me what that first agent should have told me probably 3 years earlier, which is it's time to put this book in a drawer and write the next one. And that next one became my debut novel. So we actually went to auction with that. We had 3 different houses bidding on it. We wound up going with Lake Union. And I've been really happy there. They've been amazing for everything with my career. So this is my sixth book coming out with them. And then we actually just signed a deal for 2 contemporary romantic comedies with Dell. So that's under Penguin Random House. So it's a little bit different. I just turned in the first manuscript for that. So it's going to be interesting writing in 2 different genres for 2 different houses. But, I'm a very fast drafter. So I'm hoping I can keep this up and keep writing for as long as is humanly possible. I love it.
Oh, well, congratulations. Really, you're an exception. You're sort of to the rule. Most of us will struggle a little bit more, believe it or not. But I want to go back to the one that's in the drawer. I
I
don't
do
want you to
not.
win. I don't want to harm you. I don't want to put you through any pain. But I'm married to an artist, and the my artist wife will work on pieces, and every now and then there's a piece that it's just not coming along. She's been working on it, and she actually wants to destroy it. And that's when I come in and grab it. Because I don't believe anything is written or created by accident. And it may not be its day or its time, but there may be a day where you really want to look at that again. No, am I wrong? You're going to just
This
keep
one,
it
I would
buried?
actually say no.
Okay.
So there's a couple of reasons behind that. Like the first one, again, I was sick of the story. But now that I'm further in the process, I also definitely see why that one didn't sell.
Hmm.
So, the pieces, people ask me for writing advice all the time. And the two biggest pieces I have are number one, which I stole from Stephen King, you have to treat it like a job and sit down every day and actually do it, or you're never going to finish anything. But the other one, and I have no clue where I found this, so I always assume it's the Atlantic because I don't subscribe, so I can't get back in, was that you need to, if you don't want to write a scene, don't write it because your reader doesn't want to read it either. And what I used to do prior to my actual debut novel was I would cherry pick the scenes that I knew that I wanted to write, but then I had to write other scenes to connect those. And those connecting scenes were absolutely death. Those were what dragged my books down. And that one was definitely a case like that. It was kind of a lot of vignettes about a first year of teaching, and the chapters to connect the different elements, it really structurally did not work. So, and that was, we got a lot of conflicting feedback, but I think that really was what it boiled down to. So once I started writing straight through and then skipping anything that I didn't want to do, finding a way around those scenes that I wasn't looking forward to, that was really where we started having success. So while that one, I view it very much as it got me my amazing agent who I love dearly, and it got me to this point, I don't really want to go back to that book. I think it would need so much work that it would be better to write one from scratch at this point if I wanted to do a teaching book.
Okay. All right. I'll leave you be. But can you make me one promise? Don't
Sure.
throw it away. Don't delete it.
I still have it. I have all the little
Just
half
leave it
starts
there.
and all the things I have stuff going back to, when I was in college still.
Okay. All right. And then part two of my request is if you choose to accept it, is not if, but when you get back to it, even if it's in 10, 15 years, shoot me an email and go, you know what? Because, and I'm not saying it'll be a book, it might be a short story. I think there's something artistic in there. I think this other agent, meaning well, may very well have just crushed it, but it came out for a reason. But let's give it a decade. That's plenty of time to
That
let it
one was also
sit.
more self-insert and cathartic at the time. I was in a teaching situation that wasn't great and I was kind of using a lot of
Ah.
that. Um, there's some funny stories in there, but yeah, that one's not where I want
Okay.
to be.
All right. It was your therapy, not your book. I got it.
Yes.
Okay. How do you think, speaking of which, because you seem to have evolved, how do you think you've evolved as a writer since then?
I've definitely gotten better at it. So, like I said, writing straight through. I've also learned, with that first book, you polish everything incessantly. Like it's got to sparkle because you've got to sell yourself and you're not writing under contract. You haven't had this idea approved. You kind of don't know what you're doing with that first one. Now that I'm writing on deadlines and under contract, I really had to let myself just write. So instead of going back and polishing as I write, I now wait until the end to do all of that. I keep a notebook next to me. If I know I have to go back and fix something, like if I change something midway, I'll make a note of where it is to go back and fix it. But I really try not to do any heavy editing until I'm done. I also, and this is the thing that like nobody else does that's insane. So I've had a couple of tight deadlines on books. So my third one in particular, I had 2 months if I wanted to stay on the book a year track, was what they told me, which I had never heard before, but I was like, yes, please, I want that very much. Thank you. And I decided to try and actually write this book in 2 months. And I actually finished it in 39 days, which is insane and probably just undiagnosed ADD hyperfixation. But what I started doing with that book and have done subsequently is I send it a chapter a night to my mom, who is a tough critic, and she'll tell me if something isn't working. And so I did that with that first book, even though that was terrifying. I liked having everything polished. And she loved it. She kept saying, I want more, write faster. And so now I actually have four alpha readers. I've got my mom, I've got three of my closest friends. So, and it's funny though, because they all are really strong at different things. So my mom will kind of generally tell me if the vibe is off on a scene. She's just like, I don't like this character. This isn't working. You need to clean this up a little. My best friend of 30 years now she was on the high school newspaper staff with me. She's a slow reader and she catches every typo. I will wake up in the morning and have 30 pictures on my phone of her Kindle with a word circled. And it's just wild. She catches everything that might, like, I'll even look at the circled part and in my eye will glaze over it, but she can spot a typo a mile away. My friend Sarah catches every plot hole. Anything that just doesn't quite add up, something where I didn't connect the dots earlier, she's like, wait, I don't get this part. You got to fix this. And my friend Jessica, I like to joke that she's my mean friend because she will tell me if something isn't working in no uncertain terms. It's really funny with Off the Record. I had a chapter in there that I wound up cutting. It was like chapter 28, and she emailed me as soon as she got it, and she was like, I hate chapter 28, cut it. And I was like, no, I'm not doing that. And then I got my edit letter from my editor, and the first thing it said was, you got to cut chapter 28. And I was like, darn it, Jessica. Okay. So having those readers provide some instant feedback, it's kind of, gratification when they're like, okay, I want the next chapter that I'm doing on the right track with this. But it also means I don't have to self-edit early on. And I think that's really helped my process. And I'm not as scared sending them these email chapters anymore. So that's definitely helped.
So much wisdom in what you've just laid out there, including not self-editing. I think that's my favorite part because I'm quite sure that every third person that you meet who hears you've written a book will tell you, I've always wanted to, or I started. And when did you start? 9 years ago. How you doing? I'm still working on chapter one because they're expanding and contracting at the same time. You can't do that. But what's impressive about you is you've fallen into or built this team of experts that you trust. I'm not big on sending my book out. My publisher likes to send it out to people they pay, who I don't know, who I'm not fond a lot of their feedback. Let's just put it that way. It's not as credible to me. It feels like it's a job to them. I worked on a government contract once. When you sent something to FEMA, that was our contractor. If they didn't write things on there, they were scared they were going to lose their job. So
Right.
I'd rather do it the way you're doing it. But boy, you have to have people that know what they're doing and you trust. But
Oh,
so
again, my
many
mom and a friend of 30
right.
years. And
Well, in
yeah, I'm
each one
like,
having their own little specialty. It's really interesting. What's a typical word count on a book of yours? Have you ever looked at that? I'm sure you have. The
so
publisher has.
with my current publisher, they're supposed to come in around 75 to
Okay.
90,000 words.
Okay.
I tend to be a little bit long on that. It's so funny. Once I'm at like 40,000 words, I'm always like, oh no, I'm never going to hit that word count. Like I'm never going to get there. And then I get to the end and we're at like 95, 96, and I'm like, okay, we're going to trim now. For the contemporary romantic comedy, the first one, it was supposed to come in at around 100,000 words, and I think I hit that almost exactly, like within about 10 words, which was kind of crazy. Um, but yeah, so typically I send 1 to 2 chapters a day when I'm really in the zone and working, which again, hyperfixation, I can go very quickly when I'm locked in on it. So my process is very different from most of my author friends' processes too with that. Like I tell people, I was like, oh, I wrote 6,000 words today. And they're like, you did what? Like, how did you do that?
Right.
So, but again, that hyperfixation, if I went on ADD meds, I probably would not be doing this so well.
Well, it's working for you, It really is. I came from a generation where we didn't label or have meds. I may very well have ADD, but I use it effectively for me. I mean, if I do, I'm really glad I have it because I know I have to move things away from me to stay focused. So I've learned a process. We adapt. People are like, well, can't you even chew? No, no chewing. There is no chewing. There, you want to look? I don't even look. No looking. No looking. No chewing. I don't care what it is until I'm done with a certain thing. But that's how we evolve. That's how we adapt.
Well, and the deadline issue definitely helps me. If I don't have a deadline, I get nothing done. So the book before this one, Good Grief, I had a new editor and I was like, I might be a couple days late on this book. And she was like, "Oh, it's okay. Turn it in whenever. It's fine." And I was like, "Nancy, you can't say that to me." I was a month late on that book because she
Right.
gave me the loosey-goosey deadline. For
Right.
Off the Record, I was like, "Okay, you have to be firm with this. Like I need a strict deadline." And she was like, "All right, July 21st, no exceptions. Is that okay?" I was like, okay, Nancy, try it again. Try it again. You got to really like make me
Right.
feel it here. And I got that one in a month early because once
Right.
I had the deadline, I knew what I was doing and I could focus. So,
Yep. Cut from the same cloth. Same way. I actually ask it, not necessarily in writing, because I do it differently than you do. I like to write them and then sell them. Because I don't like a deadline to be creative. It puts too much pressure on the creativity side. Everything else in my business, I'm a professional speaker, so I'm working with 8, 10 corporations a year. There's all sorts of things. I beg them. They're like, you can get the outline. No, 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 no. You got to give me a day, and I'll beat that day. But if you don't, so they laugh. But they now know Rob needs a day because, and I'm always going to bring it in when they say. So I get it. I get it. The part that you have working for you that scares the heck out of me is I don't even approach a publisher with an idea or a chapter or an outline for fear. And it's never come true, but for fear that I'll be sitting in a corner going, I'm not feeling it right now. And I've got 3 days, 2 days, one day. But that's me. We all have
It
our
just
way.
tends to work for me. And
Yep.
now that I'm not teaching and I'm writing full time, we kind of need those paychecks up front.
Yeah.
So I've got to sell them on proposal and do it that way. But my editor really only needs like an outline and 3 chapters to make an offer. I usually write significantly more than that to make sure the story is something that I can do that really feels right for me.
Yeah. That's typical, by the way. And I've been with the same, I've got 5 different publishers, but I've been with the same one for the last 2 books. They get a little frustrated because when I hand them an entire manuscript, and I'm a nonfiction writer, a lot of times they go, but we don't want it aimed that way. We want it aimed that way. Good. I can do, but I got to get it pretty much out. That's me. Listen, well, one last question for you. You've had so many good ideas. Somebody listening right now, and they're kicking that idea around. That's why they're listening to the show. They're just leading that last push. And we already get, folks, we gave you the best one already. Don't self edit. Okay. I think that's answer 1, 2, and 3. So let's go to the fourth most important. Okay. What else would you tell them about getting this thing going?
Honestly, the sitting down and doing it every day, carving out that time. Stephen King says in On Writing, if you needed the money, you would get a part-time job and you would go. Even if you were tired, even if you didn't feel like it, you would go because you needed to do it. And you have to treat writing the same way. So, my second novel, I was writing in the hour and a half after my kids went to bed every night, after teaching virtually all day while wearing my now 6-year-old. It was literally me and a baby head on Zoom for like a year. It was insane. I wasn't sleeping at night. It was terrible. And there were nights when I sat in that chair and just stared at the blank screen, and my brain was not computing to put words together. But I literally put myself in that chair every night to make sure I was doing this. And if you don't actually have that dedication, if you don't carve out that time for yourself, the same way you carve out time to exercise or do anything else that's part of your daily routine, you're never going to be able to finish a story. Like it's really got to be something that you make a priority for yourself. And that's hard. I walked by a group of moms at the elementary school drop off about a month ago, and one of them was like, I don't have time to read books. And another elbowed her and was like, shh, that's the author. And I was sitting here like, I almost turned around and said, if I can find time to write them, you can find time to read them. I didn't. I was nicer. I just kept walking. But it's true. If you don't prioritize it, it's not going to happen. And that's really what the big issue is for a lot of people with this is life takes over. And now that I'm working from home all day, it is hard. Like there's laundry I should be switching any second now. And my kids have stuff at school that they want me to come for, but I still know that I need to make that time if I want to make this happen. And this is my lifelong dream. So I really do want to make this happen.
Well, it's your lifelong dream, and you're making that dream come true. So, congratulations. I think if we put people on in a psychiatrist's couch, I think what may be going on is just the fear of actually completing the project, of
Yeah.
people evaluating. You're out there, you're standing on this platform being evaluated. You think it's tough in a classroom. Try it as an author. You've got people all over the world that potentially have an opinion, and I think we cut through it. That might be it because I do the same thing when I mentor an author. I don't have time. I don't have time. Do you work out? Oh yeah. Well, how many times a week do you work out? I'm come heck or high water. I work out 4 times a week. I did. Huh? Interesting. Why can't we treat this like the precious time you're making for those workouts? Even when, what happens when you miss a workout? Well, I make it up because of course. And the other thing I've done is I've actually told people when all else fails, what time do you get up in the morning? 7 o'clock every morning. Well, now it's 6 o'clock. We just found you an hour a day. No emails, no nothing. You're writing. So we can find it. I think I write about sales a lot. I think we're going after the wrong objection. I think the real objection is the fear, the fear of being evaluated, the fear of of the unknown. And that's why I love this show because I hope, getting at the unknowns for people. And I haven't met an author yet who said, once the book came out, I was really bummed out, or, finishing this thing was not as good as I thought. It always exceeds our expectations, doesn't it?
I also get a lot of people who are like, "Oh, I'll write a book someday when I have time."
Right.
And again, when I was doing this with a newborn while still teaching, I was sitting here like, "You think I have time? Like that's not." But I also have gotten a lot of people who have been like, "Oh, yeah, I'm going to write a book too," and they're not readers. And I think that they see what I'm doing because I am juggling about 10 million balls at any given time, and half of them are on fire. And I think that because I don't look like I'm struggling with it, they think it's easy and something that they can also do. And I think it's so funny when people ask me how to get started, and I ask them, what are you reading right now? And the answer is, oh, I don't read. And I'm like, nope, you're not a writer then. You need to be reading if you're going to be writing. Like that's how you learn how to do this. I've
Yeah.
always been a voracious reader. And if you're not reading, you're not going to finish that book. It just isn't going to work.
Yeah, I agree. I also think it subtly improves your vocabulary.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
right, and
Well,
we don't
subtly. I
realize
did
it. Where do we
SAT
come up with
tutoring, and
these
that was
words?
part of
I don't
it.
know. They just slowly sink in. It's not like the brain's going, "Here's one we're going to put in a file for you," but they go into that file. Sarah,
That
how
was
do
one of my
people?
favorite
Yeah,
teaching pieces of advice, basically, too. If a kid mispronounces a word, you never want to make them feel bad about it because they learned it from reading then. And that was
right.
just I saw that somewhere and I was like, that's amazing. So anytime a kid mispronounced a word, I told them privately how to say it, but I didn't make a big deal about it. And I was so proud of them for reading it.
Yeah. I'm the same way. I've got a writer in the family, one of my kids, and she was always experimenting with the vocabulary words, even in elementary and middle school and everything. And she wouldn't even ask. She would just insert it into a sentence. She'd get it right, but it's a word that nobody would use there. And that's the one we have to be subtle because, well done and privately. How do people get a hold of you, Sarah?
I am very active on social media. So Instagram, it's at Sarah Confino, Facebook, just Sarah Goodman Confino. I'm all over the place on there. It's very much my chaotic life. That's kind of my brand, but it's funny and fun and it works. My website is sarahconfino.com. And yeah,
There
there's
you go.
contact form on there.
Good. And it's Sara for the Sarah because there's a few
Yes.
ways to spell it. And Confino, Confino.
Yep.
Got it. No dot in the middle. There we go. Confino.com. Oh, there we got it. Well, it's been a pleasure. You're a pro and great stuff. We actually went a little long on this podcast, but
Like my books.
when I get the pros in here, I want to spend a minute or two more. So congratulations. Keep up the great rhythm and pattern and don't destroy what's in that desk. Just leave it somewhere. Send it to me. I'll put it in a
It's
file
all
for
on
you.
my hard drive and backed up to the cloud. I
There
got
you go.
everything.
All right. Pleasure meeting you. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
Well, we'll do it again as well as we can next time, everybody. Until then, stay safe.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's guest author, we'd love you to rate, review, and share this episode with others. If you'd like more information on today's guest or the Maryland Writers Association, please visit our website at marylandwriters.org. You can also hear a brief history of the Maryland Writers Association by listening to episode 0.